video recordings. Each director received notice of the board meeting. The public meeting notice was properly posted as required by law. Director Bowles indicated that he would not be present for this meeting. In an effort to provide to everyone an opportunity to, skip the page here, excuse me. We've set aside this time to hear from you, the general public. Those of you that were interested in providing comments and filled out one of the cards available at the receptionist desk will be called to approach the podium to make your comments at this time. Seeing that no one wishes to speak, we will move forward on the agenda. Agenda item one, report and possible discussion on fiscal year 2017 second quarter budget report by David Thompson, Chief Financial Officer.
Good morning.
Morning. Morning.
Each quarter I bring to you the budget report, and there are three key financial elements of our financial statements. The one is the revenue, where we are 5.5 million over budget, and this is due to additional water sales that we didn't plan for. Expenses are $1.8 million under budget, and that is primarily due to salaries, benefits, hires of people that we're timing differences on. We also had about $400,000 of Corps of Engineers lower spending than planned, and then about $300,000 of a waste treatment plant where the customer decided to defer some expenses into next year. Our projects, we're projecting to spend about $9 million this year in FY17 with a $15 million variance, and that's due to timing differences and project delays. The $15 million has been pushed into the FY18 budget. This is basically a detailed financials. The key thing I want to talk about is the fact is that we pretty much have gotten all of our revenues, 80% of our revenues in the first half, and this is the way our contracts are structured. And the last slide is basically looking at how we're spending our money. And if you look at salaries, benefits, and debt services, that makes up about 50% of our fixed expenses, and the balance is variable. And that's all I had for this agenda item. Are there any questions?
Seeing no questions, we'll go to agenda item number 2, report and possible discussion on fiscal year 2017 second quarter investment officer's report by David Thompson, Chief Financial Officer.
Okay, and this is our standard second quarter investment portfolio report. This is required by the Public Funds Investment Act. This is just taking a look at our 2 years worth of our portfolios. We ended the quarter at $106 million. This looks at our investment blocks, and currently I have about 30% of our investments in money markets. Remember, all these investments are 100% or plus collateralized. The reason I have so much in the money market right now is in February, we were getting 86 basis points on our investments. And then in March, we had basically a Fed increase, and it's up to 111 basis points. So I'm waiting for some of the longer term CDs to start getting out there in a higher percent, and then I'll start lateraling out some of the investments to protect and secure it for that. Again, our portfolio is running around 88 basis points. It's outbeating Treasury as well as our Texas pools. And that's all I had for this agenda item. Are there any questions?
Go on. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll proceed to agenda item number 3, report and possible discussion on 5-year management audit by David Thompson, Chief Financial Officer.
Okay. TCEQ code requires that river authorities every 5 years have a management audit. BRA falls into that 5-year cycle in 2017. The code also states that if you had an internal audit function, that you're exempt from the 5-year. But in 2014, the board approved the elimination of that function. So therefore, we are required to have the 5-year audit in 17. We've gone out and advertised requests for proposal directly to 12 certified public accounting firms. We also have placed the request for proposal on well-publicized websites as well as newspapers. We got back 5 proposals last week. They were all qualified, certified accounting firms that we want to select from. Plans are in June is to have the administrative and the audit committee, made up of board members, make a selection for recommendation to the board for the July approval. Once the board has approved it in July, my intention is to start the audit in August with completion by the end of the year. Okay?
Question on the audit process. When you go from, 12 to 5, what are usually the determining factors?
Okay, no, in this case, we only got 5 back.
Oh, you only got 5 back?
That's all we got. And in those 5, it was difficult to determine which is good or bad, so I'm going to leave it back to the administrative and audit committee to make that decision.
Gotcha.
Anybody else? Seeing none, we'll go to agenda item number 4. Discussion and possible action on surplus personal property by David Thompson, Chief Financial Officer.
As the board
I got it.
painfully knows that we, every quarter when we have personal properties that we need to surplus, the state statutes require that I read to the board the personal properties we want to get rid of. These are assets that are properties that are no longer functioning, too expensive to recondition, or we simply don't need. What I'd like to do want to mention one thing. In the last quarter, we did net over $60,000 in sale of a surplus. So it does earn some money for BRA from that perspective. Now, I'm not expecting from this personal property lot to earn as much. But what I want to do is let you look through the properties. If you have any questions, please let me know, and then I'll go back and read the resolution.
David, who buys this stuff? Does it go to an auction or?
We get quite a few bids on all this, especially vehicles.
Is it an auction?
It's an auction, yes. Yeah, we have an outside auction source that we post all these on the website. And it is a very efficient system that we use. And we get people who buys stuff that we normally would throw away, but they'll come in and buy stuff too.
A cell phone? Does it work?
You never know. And these are old cell phones. Maybe they're antiques. I don't know.
At your own risk.
I don't think there are any Samsungs. I don't think the batteries will blow up. So anyway, we have a lot of IT equipment that we're recycling.
Dang.
What happens to it if we don't sell it?
Depending on, I make a note of what things that we're not selling, and then in the next, we actually dispose of it. We actually don't give it away. We actually dispose of it. We either break it down and throw it away in the trash, or but we can't give it away. And we make note that is those items on the next, anytime we have any future surplus, those get thrown away as well. So you can't give it away, no. Because it may have value, and I'm just not going to challenge the state statute. So it's just better just to destroy it.
It's not even a good boat anchor.
Is that like some of the estate sales, like with my mother's
I guess
estate?
people buy it.
We had an estate sale and a lot of stuff sold and then a bunch of stuff didn't sell. And the guy came in at the end and said, I'll give you $200 for everything that's left.
Yeah,
And he took, I mean, it was worth triple that to me, not to have to haul it off, but
right.
it was,
I mean,
he, I don't know what he did with it all. Have no idea.
I mean, last time, we had like 10 or 15 chairs. They were in pretty bad condition, but we had it down to $5 for 10 or 15 chairs, and nobody would take them. So we broke the chairs down and threw them away. So if there's no further questions, I'll read the resolution.
Yes.
Okay. Be resolved that the Board of Directors of Brazos River Authority Board hereby authorize the General Manager, CEO, to dispose of the following surplus properties under the terms and conditions that are in the best interest of Brazos River Authority. Be it further resolved that the Board authorizes the General Manager, CEO, in certain instances to continue to use and/or maintain previously authorized surplus property in a manner that is the best interest of Brazos River Authority until the appropriate replacement of property is received and placed in service. No longer needed or repaired or not cost efficient. Central office, 4 calculators, 4 cameras, assorted cell phones, pagers, and chargers non-working, 3 staplers, pencil sharpener, 2 tape recorders, 13-inch color magnifox model MWC13D6 TV DVR DVD player, 2 black steel wall mount 4-tier file organizer, 1, oops, that's a little too fast. Did I skip one? Yes, I did. Sorry. All right, 60 access point antennas, 14 desktop computers, 70 monitors, 12 phones, 7 laptop computers, 4 DVRs, 4 printers, 4 routers, 4 servers, 4 switches, 2 rack displays, 1 backstay hub, 1 Dell PowerEdge KVM. 1 ViewSonic television, 5 miscellaneous cameras, 9 LCOM antennas, 2 HP toner cartridges, 10 docking stations, miscellaneous and assorted IT equipment, cordless skill drill 12-volt charging cord and case, Possum King, Miller Bobcat model 225G, welder 8,000 watt, assorted Hydrolab cables, 2 high-back executive chairs, Altiva MD Pro 1500 document shredder, LATAC Quick Chem 8000 flow injector analyzer, Turner Design 10AU flow meter, Coleman PowerMate 3750 portable generator, 5 Hydrolab MS5 units, 3 model MS5 Hydrolab surveyor, Hunter ICC integration system controller, 2 GE motor pump vacuums, IBM electric wheel writer, 1000 typewriter.
You heard the resolution. Is there a motion to adopt? Gene, second?
John Henry. John Henry.
John Henry?
Yeah.
Okay,
Either one.
okay. Please poll the board.
Presiding Officer Scott,
Yes.
Director Ball,
Yes.
Director Bell,
Yes.
Director Adams,
Yes.
Director Bennett,
Yes.
Director Christian,
Yes.
Director Flores,
Yes.
Director Grant,
Yes.
Director Huber,
Yes.
Director Johnson,
Yes.
Director Lattimore,
Yes.
Director Lloyd,
Yes.
Director Luton,
Yes.
Director Munson,
Yes.
Director Rankin,
Yes.
Director Smith,
Yes.
Director Tallis,
Yes.
Director Taylor,
Yes.
Director Zacanino,
Yes.
Agenda item number 5, report and possible discussion on legislative update by Matt Phillips, Government and Customer Relations Manager.
Good morning. I'm going to tell you guys what's going on with the session. I could make it short and just say that everything's going to die. That would be relatively easy, and it wouldn't be very far from the truth. If I were to describe kind of the nature of the session in one word, it would be slow. It's probably one of the slowest legislative sessions I've ever seen, and to give you an idea of how slow it's moving, we're almost to May. We've got about 5 weeks left, and on both sides, in both bodies, I haven't seen a Senate committee hear a House bill yet, and I haven't seen a House committee hear a Senate bill yet, with the exception of the budget, and that's the only one. So things just really aren't moving, and I think what that is, it's a reflection of the disagreements between the two bodies on some major issues. One of them is the budget, and then you've got some hot button issues like sanctuary cities, bathroom bills, things like that they're not particularly in agreement on. School vouchers is another big one, and I think that obviously what that usually ends up creating is kind of a giant staring contest where both bodies are just looking at each other, waiting on the other to blink. You know, who wants to pass stuff bad enough? And I think that until they get some sort of agreement, at least on the budget, which the conference committee on the budget is going to start meeting this week, you're going to see things continue to move pretty slow. You know, the House will continue to pass House bills over to the Senate, and the Senate will continue to ignore them, and vice versa. So getting into stuff that's a little bit closer to us that we care about, and I always say this before I get into these, this is by no means an exhaustive list of everything we're tracking or everything that's out there or moving. It's just kind of a snapshot of some of the stuff we're looking at and some of the stuff we're paying attention to. Surface water permitting, I talked a little bit about some of this in the update in January. But the first 3 of these, 225, 3742, and 226, are really meant to address the issue of how can we speed up surface water rights permitting at TCEQ. It's a process that, as we know, takes a really long time, and the legislature is very interested in how you can make that process move faster, because obviously having all the money in the world to throw at projects is great, but if you can't get a permit, it really doesn't matter. The first 2 of those address the State Office of Administrative Hearings process as it relates to water rights. And essentially what they do is they limit the number of parties that can be added at SOA. They limit the number of issues that can be added at SOA, and they put a timeline on how long a permit can be at SOA at 270 days. Now, that timeline can be extended by the judge for good cause, but it's at least a deadline that exists or will exist in statute if these pass, and where no deadline exists today. The second one, 226, is meant to speed up small permit amendments. So in a situation where you've got a water right permit and you want to change the use of it from a consumptive use to another consumptive use, obviously not from non-consumptive to consumptive, or you want to add or move a diversion point in a way that doesn't increase your appropriation or diversion rate and doesn't affect another water right holder, it puts those on a fast track so that TSEC staff doesn't spend a bunch of time working on those kind of amendments, and they can spend more time working on bigger water right permits. Update of the WAMs is obviously a big deal and something that we're very supportive of. Water rights permitting is based on water availability models, all of which have not been updated to reflect the most recent drought. And so the legislature is directing TCEQ via these 2 pieces of legislation, one of which, 696, is actually going to be heard in committee today, to update all of the water availability models for all the river basins. And Brazos is in there, and we're one of the first ones they would be required to update. Now, as with everything, that just takes money. TCEQ is going to need an appropriation in order to be able to pay to update the WAMs. And right now, if you were to look at the budget as it exists today, they've got an appropriation of about $2 million to do that process, and that is not enough. It will not be enough for them to complete all of the WAM updates for all the basins they'll have to do. If they end up with just the $2 million, at least they can get started on some of the basins. So, it's better than nothing. So at least from this point going forward, if they're able to update the WAMs, then permitting would be based on the most recent drought information that we have. Chapter 11 cleanup, there's a lot of stuff in Chapter 11, which is the water rights permitting statutes that's outdated. Lots of references to the Texas Natural Resources Conservation Commission, which is obviously now TCQ. Things like requiring applicants to submit maps on old onion paper, which nobody does that anymore anyways. Everybody uses GIS, so it's just updating a lot of the old antiquated stuff that nobody uses. And then the groundwater alternate supply one is an interesting one. In many cases, TCQ, as a condition of granting a water right, will require a water right holder to have an alternate source. And in a lot of cases, that alternate source is groundwater. But when they require that in a permit, they don't give notice to the groundwater district where the person is supposedly supposed to get this alternate supply of groundwater. And so this requires groundwater districts to receive notice of those types of permits from going forward.
Is it just notice?
It's just notice.
Not any approval or anything like that?
No.
Just
I mean, obviously,
notice?
they would
Okay.
have to approve the permit for groundwater if the person were to go get it. So they would have that.
At that time, no.
At that time.
It's not, okay.
Right. But no, they're not in a position to approve or not approve the water right itself. Moving into groundwater. The groundwater bills this session fall into two basic categories, agreed to and not agreed to, which is pretty much what everything falls into. But when I say that, I mean agreed to by the groundwater community and then not so much. The first grouping, 774, 2378, and 1009 and 4017 fall into that agreed to category where these have been worked out between the groundwater districts and either the legislators or the groundwater marketers. They're pretty simple and basic in terms of what they do. The first two, right now, in some districts, you can get an operating permit and a permit to transfer groundwater out of the district, but you have to get two separate permits. And those permits, in terms of when they expire, don't have to align. So you can run into a situation where you have a permit to produce groundwater, but your transport permit has expired, so you don't have a permit to export it. And particularly for municipal suppliers who are moving water out of a district, that's a problem. And so this requires districts to align those two permits going forward so that transport permits will only expire at the same time or need to be renewed at the same time as production permits. 1009 and 4017, it basically says that districts can't change the rules for what makes a permit administratively complete while it's pending. Apparently some districts were doing this. They didn't want to address a permit. They didn't want to consider it. And so they would just never consider it administratively complete. They would continue asking the applicant for more and more information until the applicant just said, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, and just withdrew their permit. So it makes it clear that whatever rules and whatever requirements exist on the day you file your permit, those are the ones you use going forward. The last grouping is kind of the not so agreed to category. Right now, if an individual sues a groundwater district or takes them to court, the groundwater district can be awarded attorney's fees if they win, but the individual cannot. And so this would award attorney's fees to the individual. It would basically put everybody on the same footing. Groundwater districts are not particularly fond of that. They would rather not have to pay attorney's fees. Their argument is that they don't want to have to make decisions and be constantly worried about being sued and having to pay the cost of someone else's lawyer and court costs. Obviously, the rebuttal to that is you're probably going to get sued no matter what you do, and everybody who's in the suit should have equal opportunity to have their court costs and attorney's fees paid. And then there's a couple of very broad Chapter 36 revision bills. Chapter 36 is the section of the water code that governs all groundwater districts. And these make some pretty broad sweeping changes that not all groundwater districts are particularly fond of. 1392 particularly requires districts to adopt uniform rules across the state, particularly if they're over one aquifer. Districts don't like to do that. They like to adopt their own individualized rules for their own area. And the purpose of this is to try to get rid of this piecemeal approach where you've got different regulations over the same aquifer depending on what district you live in. But again, the districts are not fond of that, and I'm not sure whether or not that's going to get through. They're currently fighting over it pretty heavily. Water planning. The first two kind of make some basic updates to the water planning process. It's been in existence since '97, but there haven't been any major updates to it since then. Probably the biggest two things that those bills do is they give certain water planning groups who choose it, regional water planning groups, the ability to plan on a 10-year cycle instead of a 5-year cycle. There are some regions that just don't have enough going on. They don't have enough projects. They don't have enough population growth. Region O might be one of those, which is in our basin, that it doesn't necessarily make sense for them to have to go through the time and the expense of doing a full plan update every 5 years. So under this scenario, they could do a more basic update where they would just look at their population stuff and resubmit what they submitted the last time, as long as nothing major has changed. Those two bills also create an interregional council that includes a member or the chairs of each of the regional water planning groups and requires them to start meeting. Obviously you have 16 different regional water planning groups. They all have different plans, and that creates a scenario where you can have conflicts among the regions. And so the purpose of creating that interregional committee is to get the different regions talking so that you try to avoid conflicts before they happen. Will it do that? Probably not, but at least they'll know about them, and at least they'll have to start meeting. The second two are kind of a no-brainer, but apparently there are regions that don't operate by open meetings and open records, even though they're technically a public body, so it will require them to from now on. As part of Brazos G and the administrative agent, we already do that, so no worries. The last two, I call them U.S. Steel. It's Buy America, and this has gotten some attention recently at the federal level with Buy America requirements, but it's playing out also at the state level. There's a couple of different bills to require state agencies and other political subdivisions to buy U.S. Steel when doing projects, and in particular, these two bills will apply that to projects that are funded by the Water Development Board that are in the state water plan. And that's not necessarily a problem. It's not something that we don't necessarily support. But as people implementing projects, you need some leeway at times to be able to source materials elsewhere, particularly in a case where the materials might not be available, particularly in the quantities that you need them, or the price of them is so much more astronomical than where you could get it somewhere else that it'll drive your project cost up. So you need some leeway in your ability to operate under that Buy America requirement, which is kind of what brings up these second two bills. You've got one that requires it, and you've got another couple that relax it. The hope is that if this one passes too. I think what you'll end up with is a combination of both, and I think these will likely be amended to include some relaxed requirements so from now on, you'll be required to go through the Buy America stuff, but at the same time, if it increases your project cost up to a certain percentage, you'll get exempted from it, or if it's not available in the quantities, you can be exempted from it and things like that. So hopefully, there'll be a middle ground reached on that one. Brackish and Seawater Desal. We talked a little bit about this in January when I went through kind of what I thought the focus of the legislature would be. And on these, I kind of call them emerging technologies. They're no longer emerging. They exist. We know that they're there. They're more expensive than a lot of your traditional projects. But it's something that the legislature has really put a focus on, creating a regulatory framework to make these things easier for folks that want to do them to do. And so they're doing a little bit of that this session. The expedited permit amendment for a desal project, that's for a situation in which a water right holder, let's just say in the lower part of the Brazos Basin, just for instance, wanted to do a desal project, but they also have their own surface water right. And as part of the overall project, they would like to move the diversion point for that surface water right upstream so that they can either use it somewhere else or potentially sign it and or sell it or assign it to someone else to offset the cost of a desal project. This allows them to do that, puts them on a fast track at TCEQ to be able to add that diversion point, so long as it doesn't increase their diversion rate, increase the overall appropriation. So it creates a scenario where you can kind of pair your surface water right with a potential desal project. 2377 is basically an answer to the question of districts where people want, groundwater districts where people want to desalinate brackish water, but groundwater districts don't have rules to allow for it. It actually is a scenario where the Water Development Board has identified several areas of the state where brackish desalination makes sense, and those areas are in groundwater districts, and people that want to do projects want to access the brackish groundwater, but the groundwater district doesn't have rules to allow them to do so. So it requires districts to create rules that put brackish desal on an equal footing with freshwater groundwater production. Permit for brackish desal return flows, that's a situation where it puts bed and banks water right permits on a fast track at TCEQ if the source of the bed and banks is brackish water desal. So you can produce brackish desal, put it in the stream, move it down and use it somewhere else, and it allows you to get a bed and banks permit faster in order for you to do that. And then state participation for seawater desal and aquifer storage and recovery. That's an interesting one, because right now, at the Water Development Board, the state's main involvement in projects is grants and loans. So they grant out money or loan out money, but at the end of the day, the state itself is not a project partner. They're not necessarily an owner of let's say, a desal plant. This bill would allow the Water Development Board to take a chunk of what's called state participation funding, and it's roughly about $200 million, and use that money to actually buy into, let's say, a desal project. So in this case, it would be the state actually investing in projects as opposed to just granting or loaning money for them. The purpose of it is to see if a lot of that private capital that folks talk about being out there wanting to invest in Texas water, but not being willing to because the state doesn't have any skin in the game, is actually out there. So it's trying to test that theory to see if Water Development Board buys in as a project partner, will a bunch of private entities come in and help fund the project as well? Aquifer storage and recovery. House Bill 2005 requires the Water Development Board to study all the different river basins and see if there are areas and identify areas where taking water out of the surface water during times of flood flows and storing it in the ground makes sense. So doing aquifer storage and recovery. Right now, I think there are many areas where people think it might work but don't know. And so it requires the Water Development Board, similar to the study they did identifying brackish water desal zones, to go through the state and identify areas where doing ASR would make sense for entities. And then House Bill 3991, along those same lines, gives you the opportunity to get a permit at TCEQ and kind of puts you on a little bit of a fast track to appropriate excess flood flows that you're going to use and store in the ground. That's the first part of what that bill does. The second part of what that bill does, which is even more interesting, it allows an entity that has a reservoir permit to go to TCEQ and amend their reservoir permit to turn it into an ASR project. So instead of storing water in a reservoir, you'd be storing it under the ground, and do so in a faster way, so long as you're not increasing the amount of water that you're trying to store. Whether or not anyone's going to do that, I don't know. I mean, it would essentially be like us taking Allen's Creek and saying, okay, we're no longer going to build a reservoir, we're going to store that in the ground. Give us a permit to do that. So it creates a framework for folks to be able to do that. Switching gears a little bit, contracting. There are several bills that have been filed this session that are just bad from a standpoint of contracting. They would not be helpful for us or any other public entity that has a contract with an outside contractor or engineer. The two that I'll focus on the most are this first one and this last one. 1053 reduces the statute of limitations on when you can go after a builder for doing a bad job, basically. Right now it's 10 years, it reduces it to 5 years. We do large projects, and sometimes we're not going to find major problems or defects within 10 years, much less 5 years. This building is a good example of that. Most of the issues with that weren't found until the 11th year. And so shortening that is obviously problematic for entities that build large projects. And then this last one, retainage. As you all know, that we have retainage in our contracts, and it's something that we use to make sure that we get the work done the way that we want it. This would limit retainage to 5%, or in some cases less than 2%. We typically look at 10 at a minimum in terms of retainage. So this is obviously problematic. The good news about all these is, as I said before, everything's moving so slowly. All of these are all still in committee in their originating body. So they're not necessarily moving fast, and they've got a whole host of opposition in addition to entities like BRA. You've got TML, you've got school districts, you've got a whole bunch of folks that just don't like these and don't want to see them move. So that's good news. And then oversight and transparency. If you all remember last session, the legislature passed a bill that put all the state's river authorities under the sunset review process. Since that time, about 4 river authorities have undergone the sunset process, really small entities. They did the Paladuro River Authority, Central Colorado, Upper Colorado, and the Sulphur River Basin Authority. But even with all that, there's now a bill that would remove all of the river authorities from the sunset review process. As we were whenever the bill was passed, we're neutral on that. We have nothing to hide. We're happy to go through whatever process the legislature wants us to go through. If they put us under sunset, fine. If they take us out, fine. It's whatever they want to do. Dates of interest, just throw these out there. May 12th, last day for the House to consider any major bills of theirs that are non-local. 24th, last day for the House to consider all Senate bills, and then the 29th is obviously the last day of session. So we're getting close. Like I said, I got about a little over 5 weeks. The last thing I'll say is, as it relates to appointments, several of you may have already gotten notice from the governor's office or should be receiving it relatively soon. Those of you who were appointed after last session, so between last session and this session, that still need to be confirmed, I think there's about 10 total, are going to be up for confirmation in front of Senate nominations in May. Most of you will not have to appear. There are a couple of directors who have gotten a notice that you'll have to go to the meeting, but for the most part, you won't have to appear. What the governor's office will ask you to do is update all your stuff. So all of your financial statements and all of your applications will have to be up to date. So that's what the notice will tell you to do, is just make sure that everything that they have for you is up to date. So, and obviously we can answer any questions that y'all have about that and just let us know.
Any discussions about special sessions at this point?
Yeah. The betting money is on them definitely having one. I think that what it would be over would be the budget. I think, and you know, the thing with the budget, it's not that each different budget spends a considerable amount more money. They both generally spend the same amount of money. The issue is what they spend it on and how they spend it. You know, the House borrows money from the rainy day fund and pays for everything within the current or within the biennium that it's supposed to pay for it. The Senate doesn't borrow from the rainy day fund, but instead delays payments to certain things until the next biennium. It's an accounting trick, and it's not something. It's being made into a big deal recently as if it's the first time it's ever happened. My first session in the legislature was working for Senate Finance. They've been doing this for a really long time. This isn't anything new. Delaying payments until the next biennium in order to make the budget balance is pretty common practice. But that's probably the biggest disagreement on how exactly they pay for everything. So if they have one, it's going to be on that. And it would probably be immediate. I mean, they would call them back the next day to come in and try to pass a budget. But when they're back then, what all can get added to that special session? The sky's the limit, because the rules in terms of what it takes to pass something in a special session are much different. It requires the bar's much lower in terms of passing stuff. So you want to add vouchers, you want to add bathroom bills, you want to add any number of things, they would have an easier chance passing in a special than they would in a regular. Any other questions?
On the area where you mentioned where you're using the river for transporting, is that for desalinated water, or is it for brackish water that's going down to be desalinated?
It's for desalinated water, so it's water that's already been treated.
So it's the same quality, they can take out the same quantity out of the river without having to...
Right.
It's all mixed?
Yes. But no, it's not putting straight brackish groundwater in. No, it's not that, no.
Did you give a prediction on the
Removal from Sunset bill?
So it doesn't have a Senate companion, which means its chances are lower. You know, so it's a standalone House bill. It will be on the floor on Wednesday in the House for the House to consider. My assumption is it will pass the House. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put it on the calendar if they didn't have the votes to pass it. I do not see a path forward in the Senate for that bill to pass. It's Lyle Larson, who's the chair of House Natural Resources. He wasn't necessarily supportive of putting river authorities under sunset. He thinks it's an unfunded mandate and, you know, wants to take them all out. But again, I just don't see a way for that bill to pass the Senate. I don't know who would pick it up. And I know that there's considerable opposition. The bill that passed the Senate, or that passed the legislature last session, had about 10 co-authors in the Senate, all of whom are still there. So.
Any more questions? Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 6, discussion and possible action on Brazos G budget amendment by Trey Busby, Regional Customer Relations Business Manager, Central Basin.
Chairman, thank you very much. Today's item is an action item. BRA is exercising its charge as administrative agent for Brazos G and requesting to amend the FY 2017 budget for additional Texas Water Development Board grant funds that have been made available for Brazos G planning tasks. We're requesting board authorization to increase federal reservoirs budget with additional grant funds from the Texas Water Development Board. The professional services line item will be adjusted from $100,000 to $221,000, and advertising costs will be increased from $5,000 to $6,500. Texas Water Development Board grant funding will cover the budget adjustment for additional work that will be performed by Brackish consultant HDR in FY 2017. With that, I'll take any questions. Yes, sir.
You say the total amount we will be reimbursed by the development
Yes, sir.
board?
Yes, sir. All the monies I'm talking about in this budget amendment will be reimbursed by the Texas Water Development Board. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right.
Any other questions?
Read your resolution, please.
Yes, sir. Be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority hereby authorizes the General Manager, CEO, to amend the fiscal year 2017 federal reservoirs budget by increasing professional services expenditures from $100,000 to $221,800, and by increasing advertising expenditures from $5,000 to $6,500 for expenses related to the fifth cycle of original water planning with grant funding from the Texas Water Development Board.
You've heard the resolution. Motion to adopt. Robert, second by Rick. Rick.
Who seconded?
Rick.
Rick.
Yeah. Please poll the board.
Presiding Officer Scott,
Yes.
Director Ball,
Yes.
Director Bell,
Yes.
Director Adams,
Yes.
Director Bennis,
Yes.
Director Christian,
Yes.
Director Flores,
Yes.
Director Grant,
Yes.
Director Huber,
Yes.
Director Johnson,
Yes.
Director Lattimore,
Yes.
Director Lloyd,
Yes.
Director Luton,
Yes.
Director Munson,
Yes.
Director Rankin,
Yes.
Director Smith,
Yes.
Director Tallis,
Yes.
Director Taylor,
Yes.
Director Zaccanino,
Yes.
All right. Agenda item number 7, report and possible discussion on update of Comptroller's Freshwater Mussel Work Group by Tiffany Morgan, Environmental Service Manager.
Thank you. As you'll remember, at the last meeting, we had a representative from the Comptroller's office come and inform you about the pending endangered freshwater mussel issue that's going to affect the Brazos, Colorado, and Guadalupe River basins. And I have been attending their freshwater mussel work groups. That is the state's attempt to respond to this impending issue. And I was just going to give you an update on the last 2-3 meetings that we've had. The February 7th meeting was the real kickoff meeting. The comptroller came and requested very much that all potential entities impacted by this, whether it be industry, municipalities, river authorities, agriculture, please participate in their process and be open to considering voluntary conservation options. At the same time, the regional director from Albuquerque, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, attended the meeting, gave an update on the species status assessment, which is the first step in that listing determination on whether they should be endangered or not, and that is underway. He indicated, again, the same message as the comptroller, now is the time to start considering voluntary conservation efforts. And depending on what could be put in place and the timing of it, if there's a substantial group effort to do some voluntary conservation, that may give him the authority to delay a listing. And essentially that gives them the backing and protection they need from the environmental lobby, who will sue them very quickly if they don't move or have something significant to put forward as, say, they're conserving the species. At the March 24th meeting, comptrollers issues kind of declared a little more on their voluntary conservation and what they'd like to see. They would like each entity to sit down and look at our operations, and is there something we can offer up in the vein that would be beneficial to long-term mussel conservation. And if we feel like there is something, we're willing to commit to the issue. He would like us to make a firm decision that is a process we're going to pursue, and relay that decision to them by February 2018. Then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did announce one thing that's positive. One of the 3 mussels that impacted the Brazos, they are delaying decisions on until 2020. Recent genetic studies indicate it is the exact same mussel as another mussel in the Guadalupe, and if they are, the scientific community does prove that they're the same. Their ability to meet the criteria for endangered just got extremely more difficult because there's a whole lot of them around. They recently had an April 17th meeting, but I had to turn in my materials for this meeting prior to that. It was mainly technical, stepping through the different threats that U.S. Fish and Wildlife has identified, reviewing some of the specific literature that they use to do that, and trying to plot some strategies on how do we counter some of those decisions. Some of them are a little farcical. Oil spill from 1991 in the Upper Brazos is not causing an imminent threat today. So how do we respond to some of those statements? There will be, at least for the moment, 3 more meetings planned. They're going to bring in more information on different potential conservation methods. I am currently evaluating some ideas that I have on how we could do that without having to offer up water. And hopefully I'll have a proposal to our management team by the end of May for their consideration, and maybe can start briefing y'all on our thoughts at the July board meeting or the October board meeting, so we can make that decision in January that the comptroller has asked us to make. The other thing that's ongoing right now is U.S. Fish and Wildlife sent Director Scott a request for information on threats and any mussel data we have. We are in the process of preparing that response and hope to have it out by the end of the week. It's rather extensive. And then in June, U.S. Fish and Wildlife is holding a Central Texas Expert Mussel meeting, which I've already registered for. Not real clear on what they're hoping to accomplish with that. They haven't put out the agenda yet, but we are registered on the list, and they're still pushing forward strongly with their intent to have a listing decision by 2018 on these mussels. Any questions?
Amount of those particular mussels that would say that they are not endangered, they're not threatened, and so you wouldn't have to do anything? And would it be reasonable to go do more studies?
I absolutely think it would be reasonable to do more studies, because I think there is a significant amount of information we don't know about their life cycle biology. Nor do we have very strong historical records of what the populations were in the 1800s, early 1900s. That is unfortunately not the way the Endangered Species Act works.
It won't work like that.
I think on some of our mussels, regardless of what we come up with, I think there's a very strong chance, because there is a push within certain elements of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife that really want things to be listed. They're going to say that even though they are in 3 river basins in the state, that's such an isolated geographic area that a widespread drought could eliminate the entire population. It's going to be a fallback argument. Climate change gets thrown in there a lot too. So while the comptroller is doing some great research that I think will answer a lot of these questions, how have they survived so long when we have areas that we know pre-dam construction were routinely dry, but there's still supporting large mussel populations? I think that would be a great recommendation. I have very politely stated that in our letter of response, that we would really appreciate that they delay decision until the comptroller's research can be completed.
Yeah.
I don't expect that will be responded to or probably even acknowledged.
So worst case, if we get those listed, then what does that mean? I mean, if you list in some area, I know some species, it's like no more changes in no more building and a whole lot of things like that. Prohibitions.
There are a whole lot of potential negatives for us if they become listed. Reviewing what has happened in other areas of the country with endangered aquatic species, certainly projects will become exponentially more expensive because we will have to do an abundance of environmental work and probably some specific design to prove that our projects aren't going to impact them.
Yeah.
I think some projects like Allen's Creek, that's very doable. Some of our other regional water planning proposed projects, it's probably going to essentially kill the project. As far as times of drought is probably our biggest vulnerability, and there have been cases where they have required municipalities, industries, agriculture to cease taking water to protect the endangered aquatic species, and there's Supreme Court decisions that support that. So it could be, it's hard to predict right now. I'm kind of crystal balling it. It could be a minor annoyance, and at times it could be a significant issue.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Why did this study come from the comptroller's office?
Back about 3 sessions ago, the legislature created an intergovernmental task force on endangered species, and due to the potential impacts for endangered species to impact the economy, the comptroller was named the belly button of that group, but it includes Water Development Board, Parks and Wildlife, TCEQ, Department of Agriculture, are all part of that group of agencies that are supposed to work together, get the necessary research done so that there is good, solid science to base these decisions on and move forward. But I think the comptroller, mainly because of the economic impact potential, that's how it ended up in his lap. Any more questions?
Any more questions?
Okay.
Thank you, Tiffany. Agenda item number 8, report and possible discussion on fiscal year 2018 strategic plan and financial forecast by Jim Forte and David Thompson.
We'll come back to you in July with our formal adoption of our strategic plan and our financial plan. Just want to remind you of the elements of our strategic plan. You adopted the current strategic plan back in July of 2016. Mission statement and guiding principles are shown here. And here are our primary goals. In your packet, you should have had the complete strategic plan, which included the objectives that are populated underneath these goals, as well as the strategies that help us perform those against those objectives. The primary elements that will be amended when we bring the strategic plan back to you in July will be the strategies, which will reflect those activities that we anticipate funding in the new budget. Again, in your packet was a document that represented the strategic plan, and I can answer any questions you might have on that right now. And we'll have a formal presentation again in July when we adopt it. No questions, David? David Thompson.
Okay, at this time of the year, I bring to you the preliminary FY18 budget as well as the 5-year plan. The assumption here is that you'll get a chance to see the numbers. If you have any questions or issues or something like that that you have between now and July when you adopt the plan itself, you can always get back with Phil, and Phil can forward those questions to me for your answers. First look is to take a look at the 18 revenue assumptions. To be conservative, we have not included the interruptible water contracts. Remember, those get approved in October, and then the contracts are made afterwards. Also, the system operation permit has been approved, but we're still waiting on the drought study to firm up the quantities, and then we still have to go through the contract process. So I've not included that water as well. The long-term system billings, we have 365,000 acre feet that we're going to be billing out in the plan. I had reduced it by 6,900 acre feet, and this is because we're still in discussions with Abilene. They are interested in the water, but we don't have a contract yet. The other thing is LCRA. We have 25,000 acre feet of water. We're under contract for 22,000. There's another 3,000 acre feet that we're still in discussions with Georgetown, but we still don't have contracts on that. And then the last is I am using a $2.7 million of rate stabilization reserve. And that is to basically keep the rate from 72 to 74 within my 3% goal. And that is part of the plan, and that's the plan I had from 17 as well. For expenses, we're using the 2.1 million for an employee cost index, 2.9 for the merit pool, that's 5%, which is on year is about what we do for each year. We are adding six new net headcounts in the FY18 budget. And then the system operation permit cost is going to move from a capital project into the O&M expense. So taking a look at the 5-year plan, the estimates, you can kind of see that revenues are pretty much staying flat across the year. We do have a spike in there in 2021, and that is we have some non-system rate conversions to a full system rate revenue. Also, we do have some operating programs increase in 18, and these are programs that are short-term, they're studies, they're assessments. These are programs that are not building to our capital infrastructure. But we do have, it does go back down to more normalized about $2 million per year. In capital projects, we do have quite a bit of money being spent, and this is related to Allen's Creek. We also have limestone infrastructure repairs on the Taylor gates, and that's what building these numbers out here. And then we are planning on starting to borrow money in 2019. And then the rate stabilization reserve. Now this is a busy slide, but gives you at least the rates, and you can see the percentages. I'm trying to stay within the 3%. We do have this 37,000 acre feet conversion, which does have a drop down here. I also want to talk a little bit that with setting these rates, we can meet our debt service coverage test of 1.3, and we can also meet our reserve test, which is the board policy reserves that we have to stay in line with. And then the last one is basically taking a look at the changes from 17 to 18. Talked a little bit about this. 1.5 million of this is related to salaries and benefits and the net headcount increase. We also talked a little bit about the operating programs increase for 18 and then the rate stabilization reserve. That will give us basically going from 72 to 74, which is about a 3% increase.
David, on the previous slide, our operating capital declined significantly. Doesn't it?
Our operating what now? Oh, the previous.
Ah, there it is. We're 68 million, is that what I'm seeing now?
Yes.
And we declined down to 18 million.
Correct.
That within itself does not justify a greater rate increase?
Yes.
These numbers include a rate increase or not?
These numbers do include a rate increase.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. These include the rate increases here.
Is that enough?
I'm trying to be responsible and trying to keep, with our expenses and stuff, and keep the rates around a 3%. Remember, we're not including things like interruptible water and the system op permit, so we don't know what those impacts will have in the future.
Okay.
Your question is what's more important? Keeping his variance between that 3% or having more working capital, right? And that's what you're pointing out.
Okay.
But it's hard to justify when you have 106 million in reserves, one.
Right.
Two, if you look across the state right now at all the people, whenever you get a 3% increase in something, they're raising Cain. I mean, they're going to sue. Look down at Lake Conroe. I mean, people are they're rioting in the streets because they don't want they feel like that they're being taxed enough. So this is a balance, and it says because we're going to have to answer the mail. Y'all are going to have to answer the mail, and I think the simple way is we need to live to fight another day to be able to produce water in an investment, I mean, in an environment, which you're going to see in the next thing, when we go into closed session, about how do you acquire water with all the rules, and how do you acquire water with the mussel thing going on? How do you acquire the water with not in my backyard? How do you acquire the water with the difference between water supply and recreation? I mean, it's a full-time job, and trying to satisfy the constituency in each one of those things is very difficult. The politicians have a heck of a time. You know, if you worship the God that says, let's do what's best for the community and to get more, that dog doesn't hunt. That dog doesn't hunt. So it's a very difficult environment to try to make progress and to plan and do all those things.
David, if I may, I think management, we've done a good job keeping our system rate costs low. It has been a concern of mine as well that I think everybody knows that there's no easy water in our state, and we've had huge population growth. It's going to continue to be a challenge, even though our lakes are full today. It's something we've got to continue to plan for. I think you all have done a great job in that respect. And I certainly hear what you're saying, Phil. It is very delicate. I do have a question about the self-insurance reserve.
Right.
I noticed that's staying constant. Can you remind me of what that is? Is that a?
That was a board-established reserve.
Okay, so it's not, I don't see it increasing at all, and.
No, it was basically set by the board at $5 million. No, we have not. So I don't think we've ever done that, no.
Didn't I see where we have 23 million of commitments but have not been funded at this point in am I missing something? Seemed like we had some projects that were not funded that were deferred or delayed.
Right.
And that was a number I remember.
Correct.
Is that part of the capital, working capital?
Yes.
In other words, that would come out of the working capital.
Right.
And that's the reason for the decline in the working capital in the next 12 months.
And if we don't spend the money, then it goes back into the working capital.
Good.
Right.
As directors, I think it would be good if you could just give us a little chart that shows the different water rates for BRA, LCRA, the SAWS Water District, and that sort of thing, so that if we get approached by people saying, complaining, just sort of show them what other regions are paying for water. I think we got to be one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest.
The one that I put in there was LCRA, which is $145.
So we're half as much as there.
Right.
But if I recall, like the SAWS water that's coming out of the Groundwater District in Post Oak, Savannah, Milam County, is like $1,600 is their projection per acre foot.
Wow. Yeah, no, we can get that for you.
I think it'd be useful.
Let me be clear, between 2018 and 2019, you have a missing line with projects that made that number go from 42.7 down to 29.9?
Correct.
Okay, it's just it's there somewhere, we just don't have it, because it would be much clearer if you had another line that showed it.
Well, it's right here too.
Well, yeah, it's there, but what?
It's made up of the capital projects we're going to have to spend.
It's that one?
This is one of the decrease, and then basically our operating expenses too.
Okay.
You said all related to Allen's Creek.
Yes.
For the most part.
And then we also are rebuilding the Tainer gates at Limestone. That's a big chunk of money too. And then you can see out here, this is almost all Allen's Creek.
Okay. Okay. That line, it was not on that other sheet, and I was trying to go from
Yeah, it's,
one to the other one, and it didn't
yeah,
jive at all.
the main purpose of this is just to show that we're meeting the reserve test, and basically the debt service coverage here. But in here is really the flow of your working capital, starting
Okay.
here, and you can see these are the expenses and stuff leading down to the net working capital.
But I want to be sure those are real projects we're going to do.
That's all.
Those are not, it's Allen Creek, so we need it.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
And there's other repairs in these numbers of other infrastructure out there as well.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I got one more. Go to the is it your next slide? That one, where you show us 2.1, 2.8, 2.2. Why wouldn't we go 3%?
Here?
If that's the magic number, why wouldn't we just go 3% on all of them and not go that low number?
And we can do that by using the rate stabilization reserve to raise it back up to 2%. And then that would stay in line with the percentages up there.
I mean, it just seems like you're losing some money.
Okay.
Because you're forcing that number when you really need to force it to the 3% or near that 3%. That's just my thought, because if you leave it on the table, you can't go back and get it.
Right. We just have a large.
You need to go up around closer to 3% on all of them, and then I know it makes our money come up a little bit, but it's not going to be that much. But it's big numbers when you start.
Right.
Talking about 2% less.
The total goal is to try to continue to grow the rates.
Yeah.
As we get further out here, and maybe I need to show that in another slide in July.
Yeah, I know we're gonna.
We don't want the hockey stick of the rates going up as Allen Creek and some of these others kick in there too.
And it's reasonable to keep it down if we can.
Right.
But I'm just thinking that in this case, we're bringing our ending capital down to some numbers that we could have it a little higher than that and keep money in our reserves, or keep it wherever we keep it to keep from getting too far down.
Anybody else?
Yeah, you mentioned just a minute ago, maybe going out a little further. I've got a similar kind of question on Allen's Creek. I understand at some point it's going to begin to generate revenue, but it looks to me like we're paying for it now.
Yeah.
And my question is, what's the impact on the rate structure as we go?
And that is something I need to show in July, to show you how the rates impact against the expenditures. But the lake is not to be completed until 2025. Right. Or start the construction and then.
No, hopefully construction will start 2022.
Right. And completed in 25, and then we'll start seeing after that the income coming back in for that. But during that period, our rates will then start climbing. Sure, go ahead.
Mr. Lattimore, we have access to a number of different financing tools, not only our own, the way we structure our own debt, but also the Water Development Board has some programs that defer principal payments out for the first decade that you make that loan. We fold those into our long-range financial planning to soften those rate increases and make sure that we don't have spikes in valleys.
Okay, thank you.
But I'll take a look at that for the July board meeting, especially on this piece here, or the other one here. Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you, David.
You betcha.
Board of Directors will conduct a closed meeting in executive session on the following matters: to deliberate the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property in McLennan County pursuant to the authority granted by Section 551.072 of the Texas Open Meetings Act. codified as Chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code. If you are not specifically involved in the presentation of this executive session agenda item, please excuse yourself from the boardroom at this time. After this executive session agenda item, time will be allowed for the public and staff to return to the boardroom. We ask that the public please wait in the break room in order to keep the hallways clear until the executive session is finished. 11:50 a.m. Missed the deal here. This time, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn, but I'd like to say first that lunch is ready.
So moved.
So moved. Got a second? Second. All right, we're adjourned.
And I missed my e-tick last night at dinner by 9 minutes, so I apologize.
You know, I could see if the deal, that guy just take the diversion rights and forget about spending the 25 million.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my personal call, but
I'll tell you what, I'd lease some land from Luminant, and they called me the other day, tell me they're back in business as far as out of bankruptcy. But the girl that I know up there, she said, we've got one person doing what we had 5 people doing, so they have scaled us back. I said, well, I'd just like to talk to, I had a guy to talk to, he was a head guy over the land, and he said, well, he's in here about once every other week, and said, I'll tell him that y'all would like to meet with him just to visit and see what their plans are. And she called me back. He said, well, he said he doesn't have time right now. Y'all just lease that land, do what you want to do with it, like you've been doing, and if something comes up, we'll let you know. Yeah, but I mean, they turn around in a heartbeat.
they've been fairly unpredictable in their.
Probably why they're bankrupt.
I think, yeah, and I think it's obviously easier for one person, A. McDonald, to negotiate with them than it is a committee.
I hear where he's coming from, but sometimes somebody like him that's already bought half the land they have can do it.
Well, he's got a little leverage.
You bet he has. You bet he has.